The following episode is a special interview with celebrated author Hanif Kureishi. Since the fall that left him paralysed in 2022, he has been a beneficiary of the Royal Literary Fund's grants programme, which exists for professional writers in need of financial support. If you would like to contribute directly to Hanif Kureishi, donations can be made at hanifkureishi.org.
Despite the fact I was totally paralysed, really near death, everything had been ruined, I could still do this thing, which I had done all my life writing, except I had to do it in a new way, which is what I had to make up the sentences, the paragraphs in my head before lying in bed. And then I had to remember them and then say them to the poor sucker who was writing it down at the end of the bed. But it started to work out really well. I started to enjoy writing. And to be honest, it was the only thing that, kept me sane, if indeed I am sane.
Hello, and welcome to Collected. I'm Paul Dodgson. This is the podcast about writing from the Royal Literary Fund. In this programme, we'll be hearing extracts from the treasures within the sound archive of the RLF, featuring writers describing their writing lives. And I'm very pleased to be discussing these and other writing matters with novelist, screenwriter, playwright, short story writer, essayist, and writer of memoir, Hanif Kureishi. His novels include The Buddha of Suburbia, The Black Album, and The Last Word. His films include My Beautiful Laundrette, Sammy and Rosie Get Laid, and Le Weekend. But everything changed on Boxing Day 2022. Hanif was in Rome and had a fall that resulted in him losing the use of his limbs. The altered life that followed was, and continues to be, described in detail in the Kureishi Chronicles, a memoir in weekly episodes on Substack. A collation of these was published in 2024 as the book Shattered. Welcome, Hanif. How are you today?
Hi, good morning. I'm not in bad shape today. It's about 10 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to try and get some work done when I get back home after this. So I'm still functioning. I'm still around, despite everything that I've lost. So I have, much to my own surprise, some optimism about the future.
Wonderful. And we're speaking today from, we're not in the studio as we normally are. We're in a restaurant fairly close to your home.
Well, I can't go very far. I go around the block in my wheelchair. On a very exciting day, I go to Marks and Spencer's in Hammersmith. But yesterday I bought a van with a ramp. So I'm going to write a book called On the Road, original title, which is going to be about my adventures in the van. So I'm very, very excited that I'll be able to leave Shepherd's Bush after 2 years and go to other parts of London, which is going to be very exciting for me because I've, as I say, been unable really to leave the neighbourhood. I can go on a bus. It's a bit of a doodah to go on a bus, a bit inconvenient. Sometimes I go in a taxi, but I really haven't gone further than I did not long ago, go on a trip to Ealing, which I found incredibly exciting. But I think this van is going to unlock a new future for me.
Well, that's very exciting to hear of a future that involves travel and more writing. Talking about writing, after your accident, you began to write from your hospital bed in Rome. And in the memoir Shattered, the first dispatch is dated 6th of January 2023. So that's just, a couple of weeks after the accident. What compelled you to relay your experience in writing so quickly?
Well, the idea originally was that we would, as a family, issue some kind of statement about what had happened to me. Because there were lots of people ringing up and texting, going on, what's happened with Hanif, how's he doing, etc., etc. So I thought we'd do a statement so everyone would find out about what had happened. And then I thought, well, I'll write it myself. And then I thought, if I'm going to write it myself, I can tell the story from my own point of view of what happened to me and what's happening to me now and what it's like my everyday life in the hospital. Oh, and I thought, well, that's like writing. So anyway, I started to dictate this blog which I began to call a blog, to Isabella, my wife, who was sitting rather uncomfortably at the other end of the bed, writing this mad stuff down into her phone. And that's how it started. And I was more or less totally paralyzed at the time. But like a character in Beckett, I could still speak. And I discovered that I hadn't lost my mind or any part of my brain. That's the only bit of me that still functioned. So I started doing this, and then the kids came over to see me, and I dictated some of the blogs to them. And I was doing this every single day. And I really started to enjoy it, despite the fact I was totally paralyzed, really near death, totally fucked. Everything had been ruined. I could still do this thing, which I had done all my life writing, except I had to do it in a new way, which is what I had to make up the sentences, the paragraphs in my head before lying in bed. And then I had to remember them and then say them to the poor sucker who was writing it down at the end of the bed. But it started to work out really well. I started to enjoy writing. And to be honest, it was the only thing that, kept me sane, if indeed I am sane.
Did you compose whole pieces in your head, those early pieces? Were they written in that way, or were you writing as you spoke them?
Both. I was writing them at night, sleepless in my hospital room, writing this stuff. And then I had to try and remember it the next day. And then also, though, I would extemporize. I would start to make up stuff. I'd say a thing, and then I'd say it like I am now, and then I'd say another thing, then I'd say another thing, and they would write it down and put it out. So I had to use the trauma as an excuse, as it were, to find a new way of writing. Obviously, I'd never done this before. It never occurred to me to write through somebody else, to shout at my wife sitting at the end of the bed and get her to write it down. I always thought the writing was a solo activity.
Well, it is so many. We tend to think of writing as being something private, and you choose the moment that you expose the writing to somebody else. So it is very, very different. Did that change the way you wrote?
Well, it changed the way I wrote in the sense that you have to be more direct. You just have to say it. You can't really revise it or fiddle around with it or sit there staring out of the window for ages thinking, what's the right word, and all that, rewriting the paragraphs and so on. It doesn't particularly matter. The writing, funnily enough, the writing's no worse for the fact that I do it more quickly and more directly. No one said to me, your writing's got much worse since you started saying it directly. It's a new thing and it's an experiment, and I much prefer it. I'd never go back to the old method.
Wouldn't you?
Anyway, no. Even if I could, I wouldn't. It's much more fun. My son Carlo comes around my house. We talk about football, we talk about cinema, we talk about the family, we discuss the diet of the dog, all kinds of things. It's really fun. It's more fun than sitting locked up in a room, which is, all writers are locked up in a room, sitting there in their underpants trying to write. I'll never do that again. I don't miss it.
I've seen footage of you writing with your son on a television program, and It seemed to be quite a collaborative act where he was commenting on the word choice and you were commenting on his comments. And is it now a collaboration with him?
Well, yesterday was Monday. Monday is always a bummer as a day because he brings up a blank screen on the computer. We stare at the blank screen and then we argue. Then I make 5 suggestions for what we're going to write about this week. And he says all 5 of these suggestions we've done already, we've done before, which I'd forgotten about. And it seemed to me to be startlingly original ideas. So Carlo is very argumentative. The week before that, I wrote a blog with my other son, Sachin, about our trips to Pakistan. And I hadn't written with Sachin for a while. So we did something new, emerged from my collaboration with him. But yeah, it's like having an editor in the room with you. You know, he says, "Nah, you can't say that, mate. You said that before," or "That's clumsy," or "Why don't we put that into AI and see if that works?" Because they're young people and they're really interested in AI and they think AI can do everything.
Because, of course, you have worked collaboratively in the past in theatre and on films and on television. That all of these things are highly collaborative acts, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, I've spent my life collaborating with various people, even musicians like David Bowie, theatre directors, film directors, dancers like Akram Khan, for instance. And I like collaborating. And you do stuff when you're collaborating that you can't do on your own. And you see other people's talent in action, you know. And working with someone is different to having a drink down the pub with them. Working with them is much more an intimate thing. You have to find a way of working together without inhibiting one another, etc. So yeah, I like collaborating, and I like collaborating with the boys. And I'm thinking of collaborating with other people. Maybe there are other people I could write with. What would happen if I started writing with another writer? Could we find a way of doing something together that we couldn't do on our own? So it's a good experiment.
Let's listen to one of our archive pieces now. This is from author, journalist, and sometime presenter of this podcast, Sonia Valero.
When I was in my late 20s, I moved from Delhi to Bombay, drawn like everyone else to the energy and ambition that was synonymous with this vibrant city by the sea. I was a journalist by profession and used my job as an excuse to nose around everywhere. I was drawn to the city's subcultures and spent many hours interviewing hijras, sex workers, and gangsters. One day, I came across a dance bar. It was a Bombay institution like no other. Tiny, dingy, and smoky, it was full of girls dancing to Bollywood music. The audience of men showed their appreciation by throwing money in the air. The atmosphere was electric. Bombay's dance bars are sometimes compared to strip clubs, but in fact the women are always modestly dressed and only ever dance. Many of the women had found refuge in the bar, having escaped forced marriages or abusive relationships in their little villages. In Bombay, they lived by their own rules. They were independent and free. Their courage struck me as profile-worthy, and before long, a major publisher had signed me on to write a book on dance bars. I interviewed hundreds of people. I lived with the dancers and traveled with them. That's the hard work done, I thought. Wrong. That was the easy part. After I wrote the first draft of my book, I was taken aback by how it made no sense at all. There were too many characters. The narrative wasn't clear even to me. What was the story I was trying to tell? I was a thorough reporter and a capable writer, but I didn't yet know how to write a clean and simple text. I deleted all 100,000 words and set out to try again. I wrote another 80,000 with equally little success. I had produced another word salad. 2 years passed. I tried one more time. And as I wrote this third draft, I realized that I was writing an entirely new book. In fact, the third book I'd written so far. When I started my fourth draft in year 4 of my project, I decided it was time to be ruthless. I deleted virtually all the characters, scenes, and storylines that existed, leaving one central figure. She was a 19-year-old dancer named Leela. Leela, I realized, would tell the story the way it was meant to. She didn't need anyone else. It's quite natural to want to honor every single voice that contributes to or illuminates the story. But as writers, our goal is to make people read our books. If we write unreadable books, well then, who will read them? On my 5th draft and many hundreds of thousands of words later, I finally had my book. I called it Beautiful Thing Inside the Secret World of Bombay's Dance Bars. When readers ask me how I wrote it, I always tell them I actually wrote 5 books. And what they're reading is just the one.
That was Sonia Falero. Hanif, do you recognise that experience of finding the story through writing and rejecting?
When I heard that account of Sonia's struggle to write that book, I thought, bloody hell, that's hard work. Really hard. And took a lot of persistence and dedication to write that book over and over again until she got something that she liked. She went through a lot to finally get there. And you tend to do that. I don't know how experienced she is as a writer, but you tend to do that at the beginning when you're writing because you really don't know who you are or what your voice might be. You don't really know what your subject matter is or your point of view is. So writing at the beginning is much harder than it tends to be later on when you've got much more confidence in yourself and you tend to know what you're doing and what you want to say.
Was that your experience in the early days with screenplays and perhaps The Buddha of Suburbia?
Yeah, I remember after leaving university and living in a flat in West Kensington and sitting down to try and write properly, even though I'd written it as a teenager quite a lot. And I just couldn't find a way of writing about myself. It was during the period of punk as well. We were going to see bands and you know, all those kids were dressing up and, you know, hanging around Vivian Westwood's shop, the King's Road. And I remember thinking, I just don't know how to write about all this stuff. How do I put all this stuff into one book? How can I write about race? How can I write about people walking around with pins in their clothes? How do I write about music? How do I write about my father coming from Bombay to England and so on? And I had no idea how to put all that together. Years later, probably about 10 years later, at the end of the 80s, I began to figure it out with The Buddha of Suburbia. When I finally turned what had been a third-person novel into a first-person novel. And I wrote the lines, "My name is Karim Amir and I'm an Englishman born and bred almost." You know, that's the voice. That was the point of view, but it takes ages to get there. So the experience that Sonia describes wouldn't be unfamiliar to anyone, to a painter, to a poet, to a dancer, to whoever you are. You've got to go through a lot before you get to finding something that represents you.
And you have to also understand that you have to go through a lot, because I think that's one of the problems. I mean, sometimes when I'm teaching writing classes, people will look at a passage and say, well, this writer can just do this. This is something they can just do, as though it's something they might churn out in the morning after a cup of tea. Whereas it may well be, 10 years down the line that comes out.
Unfortunately, it might take 10 years or you might do it in 10 minutes. Some people, particularly musicians, they can write really brilliant stuff at a young age. But writing a proper book, you probably need to be around the age of 30. And you probably need to start doing that around your early 20s. But that's called an apprenticeship. And you can't really short circuit that. You've got to go through that. You've got to learn. You've got to also develop discipline, which is the ability to go back and go over and over and over the same damn thing until it starts to look okay.
Let's move now to the next of our pieces from the Sound Archive. This is from author and academic Marianne Colbrand and tells the story of an early infatuation and first love.
I first fell for Freddie in his skin-tight satin jumpsuit in a repeat of the 1975 Queen Christmas concert from Hammersmith Odeon. It wasn't lust exactly, not initially. It was just more that I absolutely loved the way he looked. The scraggy, hairy body, the black eyeliner, the black nail varnish. I saved my pocket money to buy his records. On the back of the first Queen album was a picture of Freddie's flat, all ostrich feathers and tatty velvet sofas. This was glamour. This was escape. This was definitely not Worthing. And then one day, it was announced at school that we were going to see Othello in London. London, where Freddie lived. With the skills that later saw me become a criminologist, I tracked him down. I knew his last name, Bulsara, and there he was in the phone book. F. Bulsara, 100 Holland Road. We were on. The day of the Othello trip dawned. As soon as our party arrived at Victoria and Sister Brenda of the Sorrows had her back turned, we made a run for it straight to Buckingham Palace, which was the only place in London we knew. Now what? My friend said. How are we going to get to Holland Road? We'll hitch, I said confidently, and stuck my thumb out. We were in luck. Within seconds, a woman in her 40s in a bright pink Mini pulled over. Are you girls lost? She asked. Sort of, said one of my friends. We're trying to find Freddie Mercury, I said, but we know where he lives. I think I can get all of you in here, she said. We clambered in. I was jubilant. Fate was shining on us. It was meant to be. 100 Holland Road wasn't quite what we expected, though. It was on a busy street, a white building with peeling paint and grimed-up windows. But he definitely lived there. His name was on the door. I rang the doorbell. Nothing. Now what? Said my friend. We wait, I said in my most imperious tone. He's probably recording or at this record company or something. Don't pop stars record at night, my other friend said. We are waiting, I said, in a tone my friends had learned would brook no disobedience. We waited. And one of my friends started to unpack her packed lunch. I'm starving, she said. I am not bloody meeting Freddie Mercury stinking of boiled egg and fish paste, I said indignantly. Food can wait. It started to rain. Maybe he was home and sleeping. I rang the doorbell again. Maybe this wasn't a good idea. My friends were panicking. Sister Brenda of the Sorrows had our rail tickets. We had no way of getting home unless we went now. I conceded temporary defeat. We stood at the side of the road again and stuck our thumbs out. But it was rush hour and no one was stopping. We decided to walk. Once back, we faced 2 weeks of detention, writing out, Hail, Holy Queen, forgive us our trespasses, at least 1 million times. But then, in those dark days of rain, loneliness, and endless detention, I saw an ad asking for new writers for Jackie magazine, our teenage Bible. I wrote in, and I was given a trial assignment, 750 words on my first love. So I wrote about Freddie and our trip to London and how every man I would love for the rest of my life would have to have a little bit of Freddie about him. Reader, I got the job. All thanks to Freddie and that day in the rain spent sitting on his doorstep, waiting for life to begin.
Marianne Colbrand there. So hearing that piece makes me think of David Bowie, who was a few years ahead of you at school, I believe, and then you later worked with on The Buddha of Suburbia, on the TV soundtrack. Did he meet up to your expectations when you met him?
Yeah, I met David Bowie in the, I think it was the early 90s, when we were about to start shooting The Buddha of Suburbia, or I think we'd already shot it. Anyway, we were talking about the soundtrack, and we met up with Bowie in order to ask him whether he would give permission for us to use his music on the soundtrack, and also whether he'd give it to us cheap. And there was a kind of misunderstanding, and he said to me, "Oh, I thought you'd never ask," which meant he wanted to do the soundtrack to the show, an original soundtrack, not just putting on, Life on Mars on the track. So that's how it kind of started. And then we went off to, me and the director, Roger Michel, we went to Switzerland to work with him on it, which was quite stressful and quite obviously interesting.
Why was it stressful?
Well, it's a bit stressful to have to tell David Bowie that, it needs to be a bit slower there and a bit quicker there and a bit more this there and a bit more of that over there. Because what he had sort of done was write songs rather than adapt the music to what was happening in the scene. I mean, the songs were great. They didn't fit at all with what was happening in the scene, so we had to explain this to David Bowie. And he was a brilliant man, an extraordinary man, very, very intelligent, sensitive person, And he went off and did it. And he did a really good soundtrack. And then he made an album, The Buddha of Suburbia, based on some of the songs he'd written earlier. So it all worked out in the end.
So it was a real collaboration.
Well, he did the music. It was his music. And it was just me telling him to do it a bit quicker and a bit slower here and there. Because, there are moments in the story where you need to create tension, for instance, or do this, that, and the other to create a certain kind of atmosphere. And he'd never done that before. He'd wanted to do a soundtrack to The Man Who Fell to Earth, I remember him saying. But when they finished shooting, he said he was too exhausted after that to then write the whole, soundscape for that movie.
When you're writing, do you listen to music?
I used to listen to music all day. First thing in the morning, all the time. I just had stuff going on. And then I had my accident. And I never wanted to listen to music again. I think I found it too upsetting. Suddenly I found myself listening to Bach or the Beatles or Miles Davis or any other stuff I liked. The thing about when you have an accident like mine, all your defenses are eroded. Everything that enables you to get through the world every day, i.e. having strong defenses, that you can ignore stuff, get on with things, push people away, not think about terrible events. The defenses that enable you to follow your desire and work and so on. You really lose your defenses after this, which means that you're incredibly vulnerable. So if I start listening to music, I find it now is too upsetting. It really does my head in. So I never listen to music now. I listen to one record that me and Isabella listened to, the song called Losing My Religion by R.E.M. We listen to that, I don't know why, over and over again. It's weird. We just listen to one record, which I really like. Otherwise, I can't bear to listen to music now. It's a weird thing.
Let's move on to our final extract. This is by the novelist Ian Ayres, who was asked to write about the biggest surprise of his writing life.
I never meant to be a writer. I was in the bottom class of English in secondary school, a school I left at the age of 15. For almost the next 25 years, I wrote nothing. I read loads. I always loved reading, but I wrote nothing. Then, at nearly 40, pushing my 2-year-old daughter in her pushchair, a voice in my head started telling me a story. The voice was sneery and sweary, violent and aggressive. When I got home, I wrote the story down with the aim of simply getting the voice out of my head. I didn't have much idea about the internet at the time, but a quick search revealed several writing websites to which writers posted stories. So that's what I did. Within 2 hours, a publisher contacted me to ask if he could publish my story in an anthology he was preparing. He asked if I had any more stories he could look at. I said I didn't. I wasn't a writer. But over the next few weeks, I wrote 3 more stories, and the publisher loved them all. After the 4th story was published, I thought I'd try my hand at writing a novel. The disadvantage I had in this endeavour was having no idea how to go about writing a novel. But what I did have in my favour was that I had no idea how to go about writing a novel. I had no school learning to unlearn, no restrictions, no conventions to adhere to. I wrote a chapter at a time, not knowing what the next chapter would contain or what place each had in a coherent whole. I wasn't looking to get published. I was just seeing if I could write something longer than a short story. Realising early on the huge scope of this undertaking, I emailed each chapter I finished to a writer mate of mine for some feedback, without realising he was sending each chapter I sent him to his publisher. 6 months after I emailed the final chapter to my mate, I received an email from his publisher offering me a contract for the book. I'm not ashamed to say I cried. They weren't tears of joy. They were tears of inadequacy and pain and loss, each tear encasing words I'd never been able to speak. The book was carved from a place within me I'd been afraid of my whole life, with characters braver than me, more scared than me, closer to me than I ever realised. Although I've been incredibly fortunate that everything I've written since has been published in some form, every acceptance is a surprise. Whenever a reader tells me how much they love my books and stories, I am surprised. Whenever someone buys a book or takes the time to leave a review, I'm surprised. I never meant to be a writer. The biggest surprise of my writing life is that I have a writing life at all.
That was Ian Harris. Did anything in that piece resonate with you?
Well, I liked what he said about reaching a reader. We published my blogs on Substack, which is a public forum, a platform where you can read writing. And I'm always pleased and thrilled when somebody writes to me and says something that I've written. Maybe The Buddha of Suburbia, maybe Shattered, maybe a blog I wrote last week. It means something to them because as a writer, you're working in isolation. And then you send out your work into the world. And usually there's a, resounding silence, obviously. You don't really see people reading your books. Occasionally you might see someone on the tube, one person, and you jump for joy. It's not like with a movie, you can sit in the movie house and you can watch an audience laugh at the same time and respond to what you've written. But with a novel or a short story or whatever, it doesn't work like that. So some people stop me on the street, or they write to me and say that, that when they were 14 or 15, an Asian kid living in Britain, and they read my stuff and they found characters that resembled them. And it cheered them up that I could create characters or write about a world they didn't know could be put into a book. And that really cheers me up. That's why I'm doing it. It might take years. I wrote The Buddha of Suburbia at the end of the 80s. And now someone might say to me, that book meant a lot to me. And you think, well, that's why I did it. And I'm really pleased that finally, after it may be years and years later that someone picks up your book and it means something to them. So it's very gratifying that all the work that I did might turn out to have meant something to someone else. So that idea resonates a lot with me.
Can I finish by asking you the same question? What was the biggest surprise, or what has been the biggest surprise of your writing life?
Well, I have to say it's a surprise, every morning that anything turns up on the page at all. the surprise of doing something new. I wrote something last week, a blog, and before Carlo and I sat down to write it, my head was completely empty and I had no idea what we were going to do. And I thought, it's over. I'll never have another idea again. So it's always a surprise when anything turns up at all, because you don't necessarily know where it comes from or why you've thought of that particular idea. We believe, I think, all the time, we writers, that it's all over. You'll never have another idea again, because the idea appears rather spontaneously, sort of out of nowhere. And suddenly you go, oh yeah, that's a great idea, let's do that. But you can't force it. You just have to sit there and stare at this bloody blank screen in despair. And then after a while, something will start to happen. And that's a kind of grace, I guess.
Well, that's a great place to finish on, I think. So thank you. That's the end of this episode of Collected, and time for me to thank our guest, Hanif Kureishi, for his thoughts and words. And with that, this is me, Paul Dodgson, saying goodbye.
You've been listening to Collected, the podcast about writing from the Royal Literary Fund. If you'd like to share any comments or questions, please use the hashtag RLFCollected on our social media channels. The music was composed by Andy Glenn. There was research by Nicola Baldwin and post-production by James Robertson. Our producer was Anne Morgan.